Okay, everyone, we're learning the Sicha from Chukas, the year Tafshin Chavtes 1969. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, so the Shabbos Parshas Chukas, this is the year, that year, in 1969, the Parsha was Chukas Balak together, for the year Tafshin Chavtes. Hey, Bob, we're just getting ready to start. Okay, so the Rebbe starts the Farbrengen. The Rebbe says, Tzivle Nagin, he asked them to sing the special song they would sing before the Rebbe would say a Hasidic discourse. But Amar Maimer, the Rebbe said the Hasidic discourse on the verse of this week's parsha, which is Zos Vaydaber, God spoke, Zos Chukas Torah. These are the chukim, the commandments of the Torah. This Maimer, the Rebbe, it says in the footnote, in the parentheses, was edited by the Rebbe. Not all the Rebbe's discourses or talks were edited. So this one was edited. Okay, we continue. This is going to be a shorthand sicha because this also is a sicha that's edited. So in the Rebbe spoke, Habir b'maimer hamedrash, the medrash that says, Amalei Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, God said to Moshe, the Achir Sheilasi b'negeas al tumas meis. When God spoke to Moshe and told him, what is the way one becomes purified from the impurity of death? There's different types of things that cause things to become impure or that are impure, and the most severe of them is tumas meis, the impurity of death. Moshe said, how could one purify themselves when they become in contact and it gives off the impurity of death? Moshe became almost green, thinking about the complication and the severity of the impurity of death. And God responded to him and he said, that although how it works and the whole complication of the mitzvah of para aduma, the mitzvah of the red heifer, which is a chukah. Chukah means it's a mitzvah that's beyond our understanding. God told Moshe, to you I'll reveal the understanding or the meaning to the idea of the red heifer. Because in general, the red heifer is the definition of a mitzvah that is a choik that is not understood. If, based on what we're saying, that the mitzvah of paradum, of the red heifer, is the chukah, is the mitzvah that's considered a chayk. A chayk, again, is one of the mitzvahs. There's three types of mitzvahs that are understood, mitzvahs that represent the identity of the Jewish people, which are called edus, that are testimony about the Jewish people, like a holiday. And then there's the chukim, the mitzvahs that are not understood. Just that's what God said, we have to do it. So why would God reveal it to Moshe? What is the point of a chuk? A chayk is to tell you this is the point of the Torah. Our connection to Torah and the reasoning we do the Torah mitzvahs is not because we understand it. The whole point is that we're doing it because this is what God commands from us. This is why they define that there's a concept of toiling in Torah. Torah is not something you have to toil and work hard to try to find a connection to Torah and an understanding within your limitations to Torah. All the toiling is for us to reach that level of chayk, the level of the unknown of Torah, that is beyond our comprehension. Hare, so if that's the case, if there's an idea in Torah of things that are the unknown, there's the depth that's beyond our comprehension. Hare, so when God reveals His hidden reason for the red heifer, then Moshe is lacking, because Moshe is not able to serve Hashem on that level of reaching beyond his comprehension because he comprehends. I'm going to read some of the footnotes here because the footnotes here are interesting. I'm going to read footnote number 2 when he talks about the toiling of Torah. So he says the Kidduah Sipur I'm reading over here in footnote number 2. As known the story brought down by the previous Rebbe, Oidis Echad 1, Shenichnas l'Tzamach Tzedek li'Yechidus, so entered to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe Yechivad, he entered into a private audience. And he asked the Tzemach Tzedek classes, that he should help. The Chassid asked the Tzemach Tzedek for his help because he doesn't have a desire to learn. He wants the Rebbe to bench him, to bless him, that he should have a desire to learn. The Tzemach Tzedek answers him, Adrab, on the contrary. The Rebbe said that the Tzemach Tzedek told the Chassid that I'm lacking because I have a rot and I have a want to learn. I'm not forcing myself to learn. There's a point of yagia, of toiling of learning. Hey, Shana, we're learning the footnote over here in the Sicha. What's the idea? What's the idea of toiling in Torah? Shemailas hayigia, the point of toiling in Torah, shetzarach lishvar satzmei. There's a concept in studying Torah and doing the mitzvahs of breaking yourself. Shezui ha'avoida diskafia shelmaila fina misapcha. That's the avoda, it's known in Chassidus, of restraining yourself, which is even greater than transforming yourself. Once you've transformed yourself, you're no longer breaking yourself. The idea of working against your character is a greater avoda than once you've you've gone through the transformation where your character is no longer a disturbance, but actually a help. As is known, madreges evet, mashenkin b'hiskafia haryu oived. The difference between someone who transformed themselves and someone who's working to restrain themselves against their nature is the person who transforms themselves is already given themselves the title of a servant. The person who's working on themselves against their nature is an oivid, the person who's in the middle of working. You've not already accomplished it. Lashon hoiva, you're presently an oivid, someone who's working. Shuba emta avodah, middle of the work, as it's brought down in chapter 15, sorry, of Tanya. When someone learns, because that's the desire to learn Torah, it's enjoyable to learn Torah. Let's say you're an intellectual and you enjoy the intellect of Torah. Shekol that you have an interest in learning the intellect. It's but then you're learning and the knowledge you're gaining, but you're lacking the avodah, the toiling of Torah. And therefore the Rebbe says, it's specifically when you're toiling against your nature, is when you're able to comprehend things that are on a much greater level than when you're learning easily. Kivan, you're lacking that through my poverty, through working on myself, I have merchav, I have broadness. Is when you toil, when you push against the pressure of yourself, is how you get broadness. So if you don't have any pushback within yourself against learning, so you don't get the benefit of anani b'merchav, to have a broadness. If you don't have the meita, you don't have the restraints, the limitations, you don't have the outcome of merchav, of broadness. This is a rule of thumb in Chassidus in general. It's specifically when you have meitzar. That's chapter 118 of Tehillim, right? Mina meitzar karasa yudke. For meitzar, for my restraints, for my limitations, for my narrowness, I'm calling out to God, and because of I'm calling out to God in a narrow situation, is anani, when He answers me, when I get the response, is b'merchav, is in broadness. So broadness is more than just average. And how do you get to the broadness that's beyond average? Is by calling out in a situation of meitzar, of restraints. Okay, let's go further back to the text. So the question is that Moshe was lacking the idea of yagia. Moshe was lacking the idea of toiling because God revealed to him the secrets of paraduma. So he was lacking the chayk. He was lacking this idea of yagia bin Torah. Because we know specifically when you're lacking something, when you're yagaita, it says yagaita matzasa. When you toil, you're going to find. Shabab hesachadas, and we know that what comes to a person when you're least expecting it is a mitzvah, something that you're toiling on. When you don't have the das, you don't have the understanding. So the Rebbe explains, Shatam para sheniskal Moshe enitam sichli. The answer the Rebbe says is that Moshe was revealed, the reasoning of the red heifer wasn't a logical reason. He was able to be, he was revealed by Hashem. What was revealed to him by Hashem was the point, the essence of the thought of the mitzvah that gives off some sort of logic. But he was revealed to the core, the motivation of the mitzvah. That was revealed to Moshe. The depth of understanding is the depth of pleasure. And therefore Moshe was in tuned with the depth of the pleasure of the mitzvah, not so much the comprehension of it, but the starting point of where the mitzvah was developed. Therefore, on the contrary, he wasn't lacking any of the self-nullification or of the self-sacrifice required in toiling of Torah, because he was at the starting point even before it was developed in some sort of reason. He was holding the point where the pleasure of the mitzvah is, which is the deepest level. Because Moshe is never his own identity. He has to give himself for something else. The only time you have to give yourself for something for God is if you're something and God's something else, and you're sacrificing your self-interest for God. Moshe was so connected to God. He was so in tune at the starting point of everything that there was no self to give over to God. He never had a self. His whole being was giving over self. There was no point of self-identity that he had to sacrifice for Hashem. And the rest of this talk is edited and printed in Likutei Sichas chapter volume 18 for more details of this talk. So we have a shorthand, I said, of this idea. Okay, the Rebbe continues. This is the year in Tafshin Chavtes, I believe. They were celebrating the previous Rebbe's birthdays also on the 12th of Tammuz. This Farbrengen is in honor of the 12th of Tammuz. This week also was Shabbos, where today's Shabbos is going to be the 9th of Tammuz. So it's the Shabbos leading into the 12th of Tammuz. So that is also the liberation and the birthday of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And that year, 1969, was when the previous Rebbe would have been 90 years old, or going into his 90th year, which be his chapter of Tehillim was chapter 90. V'yesh lahaisif, shekenu b'negei l'maish in his barber maimer, but based on what it says in the maimer, that shetfila l'moshe, we know chapter 90 starts with the prayer of Moshe. It's called Tfilas Asher. David's prayer is Tfilah la'ani, the prayer of the poor man. The prayer of the rich man is the prayer of Moshe. Even though it's seemingly a blessing for himself. So the Rebbe says, if the idea of the prayer of the rich man, which is the prayer of Moshe of chapter 90, so if you're rich, rich doesn't just mean in money. Rich means you're rich in all things, in anything that you could have poverty in. Right? The Rebbe always explains, when you say usher, the rich person doesn't add and the poor person doesn't lack in the half shekel. It's not talking about that you're poor in something but you're rich in money. You're rich in the subject at hand. So if Moshe is rich in all things, so what's he praying for? What's the idea of the prayer? Even if he's saying that there's a country out there that's been destroyed, someone else is lacking. He's praying for the other person. It's still not his prayer. It's not tefillah l'Moshe. The idea of tefillah, which means to connect something that's been disconnected. You connected to that idea. So in order to connect, the idea of tefillah is to connect, it has to be your prayer. So where's the idea of prayer for Moshe? If everything about Moshe is tefillas asher, is the tefillah of the rich man. The Rebbe says to add even more to this question. Again, the Parshas Chukas and Balak, these parshas are parshas that are about Moshe Rabbeinu. We have very strong verses about the connection of Moshe and the Jewish people. Moshe Nasi Hakov, the connection between the Nasi and Moshe and the Jewish people. Moshe and the Jewish people. So the Rebbe says like this: that even more to ask. According to the story of my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. And the Rebbe's always idea was that when the Rebbe tells a story, it's not just to tell a story. There's a strong importance to the story, and not only an importance to the story in the idea of the story, but even could trickle down to the halacha and how one behaves in certain laws of Torah. Once a person entered a private audience, the Admir Amtsoi, the holy Mittel Rebbe, he asked for a tikkun, for a very severe transgression, that when he spoke to the Mittel Rebbe and he told him that we know what the transgression was, it was a pretty low act. And when he went to the Mittel Rebbe and he asked the Mittel Rebbe, how could I find a tikkun? How could I fix this really low act that I did? So the middle Rebbe couldn't limtzay ba'atzmai. Afilu b'dakis to he couldn't even find, in the most refined manner, a connection to this sin. He didn't answer the person. The Rebbe says here, there's a similar story to the Tzemach Tzedek. The l'chorei nemuvin seemingly doesn't make sense. Why couldn't he just answer him? Like a tefillas asher. According to those who say that Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer is not a prayer for himself, but a prayer for others. So when the Mittel Rebbe or the Tzemach Tzedek hears that someone did a great transgression, a severe transgression, that requires a deep fixing, even if you can't find it within yourself any connection to the sin, but on behalf of someone else, you could help that person out. And even if I'm not lacking, which is the idea of the prayer of the rich person, that if you're saying the answer is because you're praying for other people, so too you can help fix for other people. Therefore, we must say that just like the prayer has to be for Moshe himself, so too the Mittel Rebbe, in order to connect and find the fixing for that person, the Mittel Rebbe has to find the fault within himself. In order to help someone else, you're not standing from a distance. Wow, that person's in real need. I'm nothing to do with that situation. But as a smart or a connected or a caring person, I'll advise or help that person. But I don't feel any connection to the person's problems. And the Rebbe says it doesn't work like that. The Mittel Rebbe couldn't communicate in a response to that person because he couldn't find within himself any connection to the violation, to the transgression. Vimkain, the question asks itself, so what is the prayer of Moshe if he's an Asher? Shehi tefillas Asher. So we have to define, what does it mean to have a tefillah? It means you need something, not that you're praying for someone else. If it's called a tefillah, the prayer of the rich person. And again, rich doesn't mean in one specific thing. It has to be all-inclusive. Again, just a side note, at the end of the story of the Mittel Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe went out and he found within himself a way to connect a fault that he had that could connect to the fault of that person, and then he came back into the room and gave the person the tikkun. But in order to give the tikkun, the fixing for the person, he had to connect some way or another that he himself suffered from the same transgression. And obviously it wasn't anything in the same idea. It was an idea of that when he said chassidus, people didn't listen, so he felt like his saying chassidus could be wasteful, right? You talk and no one's listening. So he was able to connect to someone who did a sin similarly like that, obviously in a much more extreme of doing something that's wasteful. Okay. The idea is like this. So the answer to the question is, what does it mean to have a prayer of a rich person? The difference is that when Moshe does pray for a city that's destroyed someplace, the idea is that because, like we said before in the shorthand of the Sicha, that Moshe is being revealed, the idea of the red heifer is not lacking Moshe's bittul, Moshe's yagia, Moshe's toiling, dedication to Torah, because he's so connected at the core that there's not even an idea of Mesiras Nefesh. His whole existence is giving over. There's no self to give over. So that's the idea of a tefillas asher, that because you're connected to the time, to the pleasure of something, you're so deep connected to the purpose of something, is b'chol makom shenimshach, wherever it is, everything stays the same. Even in the most difficult situations, it doesn't get changed with circumstances. Let's see what the Rebbe explains. There's no the chesaron. What is the idea of an Asher? The definition of Asher, of a rich person in Torah, is not a person that has everything. That I'm going to fulfill everything that I'm lacking. Ashiris is even more than getting rid of the negative. An Ashiris is a positive. Means a person who says, I have everything, I'm a rich man, that's not the definition in Torah of rich. A rich woman is not the definition of wealth. Wealth is beyond just not having all your needs. It's a situation of absoluteness. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu is so, Ashiris in this case wealth means connected to the essence, connected to the starting point, which is the pleasure point of something. And therefore, there's no situation where a bad situation deviates from that. because the essence is everywhere. The essence has to be everywhere. You can't deviate from the essence. So therefore, he says, they can never be lacking. That he has to return to the essence. Because his whole essence, his whole being is essence. The Rebbe says, we can find that also in a lower way. Hidu Akusha, as known the question. Okay, he's not going to explain this, but the Rebbe says we find this in a Kabbalistic idea, or a Hasidic idea, that the Nahira Tata, the lower flame, like the flame down here, let's say, is always calling up to its source, the higher flame, and never gives up because of that essential connection. How could you say that if it's in a lower, it means, what the point is that the lower flame is always feeling its connection to the source. How could it be if it's a lower flame by definition? It's lower. It's in a form. It's already been shaped, because at its core has never been changed. So something that's connected at the core, no matter what the situation is, no matter where you find yourself, even in a difficult situation, there's no idea of chesarn. There's no idea of lacking, because what's shining within you is the essence, and the essence is always full. Therefore, the Rebbe says, let's bring this down to avoida. What's this mean to us? Right? It's a high idea. How do we translate this to our own service to God? That no matter that when you're connected to the essence, when you're an usher, when you're rich at a core point, that you're not at any situation away from the essence, is how a person, no matter what it translates in your life, no matter where you find yourself, the most difficult, hard situation in your life, if you're an usher, you're an usher. Doesn't the circumstances of the chitzonius, of the external, how you find yourself in, or where you maybe even put yourself in, doesn't deviate from the fact that you're an usher. The Rebbe explains. How do we apply this to each and every one of us? The Rebbe says, we have a famous saying of the rabbis that says, the famous statement that says a person is obligated to bless God for seemingly bad things into you, just like you bless God for good things, right? When good things happen, you say, "Thank you, God. Wow, you're so kind and generous." So our rabbis have taught us that a person is obligated to thank God for what's called the bad, the same way you would bless God for the good. So it says, "Lo nischa ela likableinim v'simcha." What's that mean? So it's brought down that you should take it with joy. It means take the negative with joy. V'hainu shascholas avoid tzricha lias ba'ofen shel skafim sish nefesh. Means a person may ask, what do you mean? The obvious question is, and this is brought down in many svarim, stories of tzaddikim, of how does someone accomplish that you literally bless God for the bad and the good equally. So the Rebbe says, yes, the beginning is you have to start off, like we said before, min hameitza karasika. You're starting off from a skafia. You have to restrain yourself to put yourself in that mental situation that you're being thankful for the bad, like for the good, and even up to a level of mesiras nefesh, self-sacrifice. But you have to work on yourself. That what you starts off as a strong avoida, to be able to thank God for the bad as you would thank God for the good, is that should lead to a way that's not just forceful, but it's a way of simcha, a way of joy. So seemingly it's a contradiction. If you already reached the level of happiness, so then by definition, you're not restraining yourself. You're not restraining yourself if you're happy. The word skafi means you're breaking yourself. If you're happy, you're not breaking yourself. So how could you say that a person has to work on themselves, even break themselves, to mesiras nefesh, to be thankful for the bad and for the good, and then from there reach the simcha, then you're not breaking yourself. Moshe at first also, the Torah, the laws of the Paradum was not understood. Then God revealed it to him. But seemingly, once he revealed it to him, it's no longer a chukah, because now it's revealed. But once a person has accustomed themselves and made it your nature to always look at things in a positive way, work on yourself to make your want like God's want. Batal Ritzoncha, nullify your want. If ne Ritzoncha, for the want of Hashem. Gemevor b'Kutei Torah Pratya Darga B'Zen, as the Kutei Torah explains the steps of how one does that. And this idea, and that's what the idea of the Simcha. What the Rebbe is saying is, obviously it's a little bit hard in the editing of the Sicha, but what the Rebbe is basically saying is the Simcha is in the avoda of the Skafia. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, he wasn't lessened because he was revealed the laws of the meaning of paraduma. He was so connected to the essence that it was revealed to him from the point of the pleasure of the mitzvah. So to a person, the Simcha is not because you no longer feel the pain. You know that it's bad, and you're working on yourself. You're breaking yourself to thank God for the bad, like you thank God for the good. But that avodah itself is being done b'simcha with joy. This idea that we know that avodah, an oived, the person who's working like them, we said the difference between oived and eved did work on themselves. An oived is presently working on him or herself. So the idea that an oived has to be b'simcha is known the saying, She'amr Ba'al Simcha V'Agula, as the previous Rebbe said, she called Inyan HaMaser V'Yisurim Shebezeh, the whole idea that he was imprisoned, and the pain he went through in the imprisonment, and physical pain that Rebbe suffered, his physical health was affected by his imprisonment. The Rebbe said he took all the pain for himself, and for us he left the joy of it. When a person's able to and a person works on themselves, that in the avodah they find simcha, it's going to bring us to the true redemption. We're going to go standing straight to our land, the Holy Land, with the coming Mashiach. Okay, that's the second talk. The Rebbe continues. He says, okay, let's learn this talk. This thing that we said before. There's a medrash in Tilm that says, on the pasuk Tefillah Moshe, again, the Rebbe was talking that year about chapter 90, the prayer of Moshe, the prayer of the rich man. The idea of Tefillah Moshe is connected to the 12th of Tammuz, which is also the birthday of the previous Rebbe. And according to our custom, that on the year of a birthday, a person changes their chapter of Tehillim with their age. The Rebbe at that year entered into his 90th year, the previous Rebbe. The Rebbe started his 90th year. Mizber Tzadik is Tefillah L'Moshe. As said many times, the Rebbe is the opinion, and he said many times that we continue to say the chapters of our loved ones, and especially tzaddikim, even after their passing. So even if they've already passed in an earlier age, the previous Rebbe passed away before he turned 70. But the Rebbe kept on saying it's still like we today keep on saying the Rebbe's kapitel, which is today 124. Even though physically he went up above. No longer when a person passes away, are you limited to the limitations of this physical world, right? You leave this physical world to go to a more spiritual world, which has obviously a lot less limitations in our physical space. Not just our world, but our most material, coarse world. As we know, a shepherd never leaves his flock, especially the shepherd of the Jewish people. On the contrary, because now the Rebbe has less limitations than he had seemingly when he was alive. The Rebbe has even an easier way to connect to all his chassidim because he's no longer limited by space or the space of this world. As is explained in Ageres HaKodesh, it's not the Alter Rebbe already introduced this idea in the Ageres HaKodesh chapter 27. So surely, now that we're entering the Rebbe's 90th year, means the previous Rebbe's 90th year, and the Rebbe's still guiding us, and with less limitations, able to connect to everyone in all their needs. Of course, we're saying the Tehillim, the chapter that connects to that year of the Rebbe's birthday. As the previous Rebbe himself said, that many years after his father has passed away, meaning the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe Chabad, he saw his father in a dream. And in the dream he saw that his father was saying a discourse of Chassidus on his own birthday, meaning the Rebbe Rashab's own birthday, many years after he passed away. He said the famous mimer that the previous Rebbe told over that he heard from his father after he passed away, which was connected to a chapter of Tehillim after he passed away. So therefore, it's the Rebbe's point. The connection between the prayer of Moshe to the parsha that we're in. The Rebbe connects this also to next week's parsha, the parsha of Balak. In Parshas Balak Mavur, we find B'Maimer, the Parshas Balak Mishnas Tafresh Chavtas, that we find from another Hasidic discourse, I think from the Rebbe Marash of the year Tafresh Chavtas, which is 100 years from the 1869. So Shebalak uBilam Heim Bechinas Zelum Zeh de Klipa Shekeneged Moshe Var. That Balak and Bilam of next week's parsha, Balak is the king of Moab, and Bilam is the prophet from the nations. They correspond, they're the opposite. They're the Tuma, opposite of Moshe and Aaron. Bilam, the prophet Bilam, is the Tuma, is the impurity that counters Moshe. K'mayim Rizal Pasuk v'leikam Navi Oid B'Yisrael K'Moshe B'Yisrael leikam Avlumus Oilam Kam Umanu Bilam. It's brought down, the famous Rashi that says that when the verse says that there was never a prophet like Moshe and there'll never be a prophet like Moshe, Rashi points out by the Jewish people, by the nations, there was a greater prophet, and that was Bilam. And by the way, this idea that there's a tuma against a tzaddik, or against, especially against a nasi, it goes all the way down to our times. The previous Rebbe, I think the previous Rebbe quoted in the name of the Alter Rebbe, that in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, there was a big priest that was, so to say, the tuma against the Baal Shem Tov, and I'm not sure why, but they say in the Rebbe, in the Maggid's times, it was Franz Joseph, the Austrian emperor, and they say in the times of the Alter Rebbe it was Napoleon, and it continued like that. That there's a tuma for every, there's an impurity for every purity. Ubalak hayu bechinas menaged the klipos keneged Aaron. Balak, the king of Moab, he was the impurity against Aaron. Ki Balak ba lilaik daman shal Yisrael. He was trying to affect the blood. Pirish daman hainu toik from v'chaskam. What does it mean, the blood of the Jewish people? He was trying to weaken the blood, which is the strength of a person, to weaken the strength of the Jewish people. This blood desire that the Jewish people have to be connected to godliness, Balak was trying to weaken that.
Who was the opposite of the Franz Joseph?
The Magid is rich.
Uh-huh.
Franz Joseph is a hard person in the history for the Jewish people.
Well, my father's, I think, grandfather or something in his town, and he was a simple tailor, was chosen to be the person from his town to greet Franz Joseph when he visited there.
Interesting. It's on paper they say Franz Joseph is a friend of the Jews.
So there you go. My ancestor was Taylor. Chosen to have met him.
Yeah, but sometimes tumor comes in different forms. It's not always doesn't always come with the sword. It could come with the carrot as well. Shezeu inyan hakravas hadam b'avoda. The idea, that's why what's the idea of why do we spill the blood on the altar? Is the idea of the passion we have for God. Balak ba laluk daman. He was trying to take away the blood of the Jewish people, that passion they have for God. And that comes from Aaron, of course. We went that many times. That they shouldn't have the burning desire for God. He didn't want us to lose our passion. Just not have passion for God, have passion for worldly things. This is the opposite of Aaron, the great Kohen. He's the accompanier of the bride. Right? He lights the candle. What's the idea of Aaron lights the candle. He elevates the souls of the Jewish people, that the passion, the fire of the Jewish people go towards God. And Balak said, no, sure you have to have passion in life. Passion is important. But why do you have passion for God? Have passion for worldly things, for desires. This idea of Tefillah l'Moshe. Tefillah l'Moshe, Isha Likim, the prayer of Moshe, the man of God. That the sacrifices of the wicked is an abomination for God. Zeb bilam Balak. right? Because the next week's parsha we learn about all the sacrifices they did. So Zevach Rishayim, the sacrifices of the wicked, is abomination to God. This that it says, and we learned, I think it was in the Gemara, we learned that he got schusim. Balak got schusim for building the seven mizbeches. So Balak, what was his chusim? We learned, I think, in Sanhedrin, his descendants were the fact that Ruth was a granddaughter of Balak. And what's chus? The Gemara says, what's chus did Balak have to be the grandfather of Ruth, who's of course the grandmother of David, the grandmother of Mashiach? What's chus did Balak have to have part of such an essential part of the Jewish people's identity? Was because he built these altars for God. So it says, when Bilam says to Balak, build 7 altars. God says, Rasha, you think I'm going to take your sacrifices? Again, obviously, there's different levels. It's an abomination to me that you're building these altars. The altars of a wicked person is an abomination. I want Moshe's prayers. So the Rebbe doesn't explain what's this mean. When a Yid sees, I'm not sure what this has to do with 1969. Obviously, the Rebbe is talking about a certain incident. When a Yid sees the nations are dancing in the sanctuary of God, maybe he was talking about after 1967 and the mosque on top of Har Bayis. He says, when a Jew sees, how is it that the nations are dancing in the sanctuary? And not only that, they're successful in life. Look how successful the nations are. There's certain spiritual success that the nations have. Let's say a Yid walks in the street. A professor. There's an incident that happened. That there's a professor, that the Torah says he's an authority. And what does it mean, pikuach nefesh, a life and death situation, when it comes to Yom Kippur? Because he's an educated person, he's the authority of what should be on Yom Kippur. I'm not sure if this is a specific story, or in general that a doctor could decide if a person has to fast or not. I'm a Jew, and I believe everything is divine. This idea that person has an authority to say what a Jew has to do in a mitzvah, God decided that it should be that way. That's a great power that person has. A person may think, look, this person is an authority on Torah, and maybe that means I have to be overwhelmed by that. The Rebbe says, we learned this before. Moshe was scared of Pari. Pari had powers, and he wasn't scared of his physical strength. Shenikra Tanin Hagadol, he was called the great sea monster. Shuinin Toikef Aklipa, he had the power of the impurities. Still, like the Medrash tells us, that Moshe Rabbeinu, God had to tell him, I'll come with you if you're scared to go to Pari. A person may think, you have to be overwhelmed and fearful for the nations. Look how successful they are. They have an authority. They can even dictate to us who owns Eretz Yisrael. What a Yid has to do when it comes to the security of our country, of our people. We're being dictated by others. Maybe that it's a sign, and everything is by divine. The God says that sort of say our security seems to be dependent on other people. So maybe that means we have to be overwhelmed by that. Maybe that's very much connected to what we're going through in our times. So therefore, the answer to such a person who thinks that way, that the sacrifices, seemingly the sacrifices of the wicked, is an abomination to God. Yes, you could call it a sacrifice. You could call it a mizbeach. So much so, like I said, the Gemara says he was blessed for that. If you read the verse backwards, that even though there's an abomination involved, but it doesn't take away from the fact God doesn't say it's not a sacrifice, it's still a sacrifice. Not only that, it's not just any kind of sacrifice. Sacrifice was done by low people like Bilam and Balak. And we know that Bilam and Balak were using the sacrifices to manipulate their agenda. This is very much in line with the complicated issues that we're going through today, when seemingly Eretz Yisrael, seemingly the Jewish people, and seemingly it could be coming from a good place, Zevach. But at the end of the day, is when you feel so choked and dependent, and you say, well, that's the way God wanted it. If you didn't want it, then it wouldn't be this way. They're able to bring down great powers. He was able to prophesy. Even if he has to fall down, but he had open eyes, he was able to say prophecy. Even though it doesn't say Vayikra, like Rashi says, Vayakar is a low way of speech, but it was still a prophecy. And not only that, here comes the prophet that Zavech Elikim is a Zavech Rishayim Tayeves Hashem, but it's a Zavach, it's a sacrifice, it's an abomination, but nevertheless he's saying prophecy. And what kind of prophecy? He's talking about the prophecy of the Mashiach. Right? The greatest prophecies we have of the Mashiach is coming from Bilam. But Derech Koicha B'Yakov, Kam Shevet Yisrael, Yisrael Eisachayil, is all part of his prophecies. God tells the Jew, you have to know Rishayim, that this is Zevach Rishayim, this is the sacrifices of the wicked. Tayeves Hashem, it's an abomination. But what I'd rather, all the niceness of this, all the greatness, all the great, we're not taking away the good intentions of things, not making everything to be evil. But what does God really want? The prayer of Moshe. We find we know that from the beginning of time, God saw how it's going to be. The actions of the righteous and the actions of the wicked. In the beginning, the land was total chaos. That represents the actions of the wicked. And God said, let there be light. These are the actions of the righteous. But at the end of the day, he says that I don't know which one God wants. Does he want the acts of the wicked or the acts of the good, of the rich, of the good? It means there is an opinion on the higher level that you could see things from the perspective that there's value to the Maaseh Rishayim. That's what the Medrash says. It's hard to know what God really wants. But at the end of the day, the conclusion is he does want the act of the good. He doesn't want the good, doesn't want even the good that's coming from the wicked. Let's see how the Rebbe finishes off. The Rebbe is obviously talking a bit coded, and this is, of course, between the difficult times between 1967 and the 1973 war. When the Rebbe says the bottom line is, a person may say, well, what do you want from us? We're in Golis now. The Jewish people are in Golis. We're dependent on the nations. You can't just do what we want to do. Dina de machusa dina. The law of the land is the law. Tirshur es hashal meir. Asher higilesi eschem shama. Asher higilesi eschem shama. Vispalabada. Ask for the good of the country that I've exiled you to. Pray on its behalf. So we have an obligation to pray on the behalf of the generous countries that have been hosting the Jewish people over the past 2,000 years. But at the end of the day, the Rebbe says, God decided to be this way. The reason why God decided that the law of the land is the law is because the power of this world is a representation of the power of God, whether people like it or not. That's the idea. When you see a powerful force in this world, it's a representation of the power of God, right? When they talk about in the Zohar of the image of God sitting on the chair, they describe it to Augustus, who is the Roman emperor. And God decided who's going to be the king, who's going to be the president. God is the one who owns kingship, not his own kingship only, but obviously who's the right to be royal, who has the right to rule. If that's the case, when it comes to means if the whole reason why the law of the land is the law, and the whole reason why there's a power is an expression of God's royalty, and if that comes into contradiction to the Jewish law and what's good for Jews, it has no power. The idea that the law of the land is the law if it doesn't affect the laws of Yiddishkeit, of Torah mitzvahs. If it's coming, right? If the Russians say you can't learn Torah, you can't. The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say, okay, well, that's the law of the land. He taught Torah anyways, and he was thrown into prison for that. We don't get overwhelmed. As my father-in-law said, Shirak gufaiseinu nimtzaim begolas. Only our bodies are in exile. Avaloi nishmaseinu, not our souls. When it comes to the soul of a Jew and Yiddishkeit, we don't get overwhelmed by the nations, no matter how powerful, no matter if it's a v'zebach, no matter if it is clothed in good intentions. If it's not what's good for the Jewish people, it's not good for Torah, it's not what has to happen. No matter how strong they seem that they are. Even if the strength is not just a physical strength, but even a ruchnis, even a spiritual strength. But if it's a contradiction to Yiddishkeit, if it's a contradiction to the Jews' interest, if we're being asked to do something about Eretz Yisrael, it's my own words adding, that's against what's a halacha. So then we don't look at the spiritual good, the physical good, it has nothing to do. The tefillah of Moshe, we go for Moshe's prayer. We have to know that even the power that's given is given over the shoulder, means not willingly. It's only secondary. Even though like the back of a person's head, you don't have all the form of the face, the eyes, nose, and ears. It's only one piece. Therefore, there's a certain level of strength. I'm not explaining all this, but the point is that sometimes Chitzoni says more strength than Pnimius, right? If the back of the head, the fact that the back of the face, right, it doesn't have any shape is also a mila. It's a certain level of simplicity. The face has all different levels. There's the eyes, there's the nose, there's the ears, there's the mouth. There's the front of the face is broken down. The back of the face is simple. It's just one back of the head, right? So it's in certain ways that simplicity is strength, represents strength. The idea of metzach, like the forehead is netzach, is everlasting. Nevertheless, it's the backside, it's not the front. The shoulders, that's lower than the head. The Rebbe says we don't get overwhelmed. And surely we're not fearful. The very fact that we don't allow ourselves to be scared. We're in Golos. We have to do what we're told. We can't defend ourselves. We can't defend Yiddishkeit. We can't defend the halacha that says you're not allowed to give back an inch of Eretz Yisrael. So we say, well, we're scared. What can we do? So the Rebbe says we're not scared. We're not overwhelmed by that. And that itself, that strength that we hold within ourselves, that breaks the power that is placed against us. That was the idea of the 12th of Tammuz. And the 12th of Tammuz, the previous Rebbe held strong, and that broke the strength of the communist. Until we reach to the level of the prophecy that says that the Malachim are going to be your help. With the coming of Mashiach, okay, everyone can take these holy words to their own understanding. And when it should be like that. The coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, Thank you everyone for joining.